I always thought my wedding day would be something out of a magazine spread. A ballroom lit with chandeliers, silk gowns brushing across polished floors, a champagne fountain glittering under golden lights. I dreamed of a honeymoon somewhere far away, Thailand, maybe Bali, walking barefoot on warm sand while the ocean swallowed the sun. That was what I imagined as a girl, and I carried that dream with me into adulthood. But dreams have a cruel way of breaking. When Thomas and I exchanged vows, it wasn't under crystal chandeliers or inside some grand cathedral. It was in a modest church tucked away in Baton Rouge, its wooden pews creaking under the weight of a few distant relatives and two of his closest friends. The reception was a small dinner at a family restaurant. No music, no long guest list. No sparkling dresses swirling on the dance floor. Just me in a white dress that I bought off the rack, smiling through a storm of disappointment while everyone congratulated us. I told myself it was fine, that the honeymoon would make up for it. Thomas had hinted about a trip overseas, and I clung to that idea like a lifeline. Except the honeymoon never came. 2 days after the wedding, instead of boarding a flight to some tropical paradise, I found myself staring out the window of an old pickup truck as we drove deeper into the Louisiana countryside. The paved highways gave way to narrow roads lined with oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Swamps glittered under the fading light, their surfaces broken only by the wings of startled birds. And the silence, it pressed against me in a way that made my skin crawl. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Thomas only tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "Home," he said simply. "Home." The word echoed in my chest with a chill I couldn't explain. When we finally pulled into the gravel drive, I understood why. The house stood crooked against the twilight. Its paint had peeled down to the bare wood, and the porch sagged as though the earth itself was tired of holding it up. A rusted swing hung lifelessly from the oak tree out front, creaking with every breeze. One shutter dangled from a single hinge, clapping against the siding like a mocking hand. I stepped out of the truck in my low heels, the gravel biting into my soles. This couldn't be it. Surely this wasn't where Thomas meant for us to start our married life. But it was. "This is what's left," Thomas murmured, his voice heavy. "The only inheritance after everything that happened." I stared at him, waiting for the punchline, for him to laugh and tell me we were only stopping here before heading somewhere else. But his face carried no trace of humor. My chest tightened, heat prickling behind my eyes. I had given up the glittering wedding I wanted, thinking at least there would be a honeymoon. And now, instead of luxury, instead of paradise, I was standing in front of a broken house in the middle of nowhere. My husband looked at it with determination, but all I could feel was a sinking dread. This was not the beginning I had dreamed of. This was the beginning of something else entirely. The first night in that house felt like punishment. The air was heavy with dampness, and every creak of the wooden beams above my head reminded me just how far I was from everything I knew. The bathroom had no proper shower, just an old clawfoot tub with rust around the edges. The kitchen smelled faintly of mildew, and when I turned on the faucet, the water came out brown before it cleared. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, and wondered how I had ended up here. Thomas, on the other hand, looked almost relieved. He rolled up his sleeves and walked the house like a man who had just been handed a challenge instead of a sentence. He talked about replacing the broken boards on the porch, repainting the shutters, rewiring the lights. His energy made me feel even more out of place. How could he look at this ruin and see possibility when all I could see was everything I'd lost? The days that followed were harder. My phone barely picked up a signal, and without internet, I felt cut off from the rest of the world. I tried to distract myself by unpacking, but even that felt meaningless in a house that didn't belong to me. I missed coffee shops, grocery stores that carried imported cheeses, the hum of city life. Here, the nights were filled with the sound of crickets and the low croak of frogs, the kind of silence that makes you feel small. One afternoon, as I struggled with a box that had collapsed on the porch, I heard footsteps crunching across the gravel drive. I looked up to see a woman approaching. She must have been in her late 60s, her gray hair pinned into a tight bun, a walking stick tapping against the ground with each step. Her posture was sharp, her eyes even sharper. "You must be the new bride," she said, her voice carrying more fact than question. I hesitated, brushing the dust from my skirt. "Yes, Caroline Whitmore." She gave a curt nod. "Lydia Thompson. I live down the road." She glanced at the box that had spilled books and dishes across the porch. "You're not going to manage that on your own." Without waiting for my agreement, she bent down, faster than I expected, and started gathering the mess. I didn't know whether to feel grateful or embarrassed. "Thank you, but you don't have to. Don't fuss," she cut me off, her tone brisk. "This house has needed a woman's touch for years. If you're planning to stay, you'd better get used to working with your hands." Her bluntness caught me off guard. I wasn't used to strangers inserting themselves so directly into my life, but as she stacked the books with surprising efficiency, I felt a strange sense of relief. Someone else understood how overwhelming this place was. That evening, I told Thomas about our visitor. His face lit up. "Lydia, she's a good woman, tough as nails, but she'll tell you the truth when nobody else will." I wasn't sure how I felt about that yet. Part of me resented the intrusion, but another part recognized that maybe I needed someone like her. Someone who wasn't blinded by romantic dreams or weighed down by disappointment. As the days went on, Lydia stopped by more often, sometimes with fresh eggs, sometimes just to check on our progress. Each visit chipped away at the walls I'd built around myself. I didn't want to admit it, but the old house didn't seem quite as suffocating when she was there. Maybe, just maybe, life in the countryside wasn't a prison. Not yet a home, but something in between. It didn't take long for the first cracks to show. Every morning Thomas woke with a plan. Paint the shutters, replace the wiring, patch the roof. He moved through the house with purpose, his hands always busy, his voice filled with determination. And me? I woke with dread, staring at the chipped ceiling and wondering how I could convince him to leave this place behind. One evening, I finally said what had been burning in my chest. "Thomas, we can't stay here forever. This house is falling apart. We could sell it, go back to the city, start over properly." He set down the hammer he'd been using, his jaw tightening. "Caroline, this is all we have left. Walking away won't fix anything. We need to rebuild." Rebuild. My voice rose. Out here? With no neighbors for miles, no internet, no future? This isn't a life, Thomas, it's a prison. His eyes darkened, and for the first time since we married, I saw anger flicker there. "It may feel like a prison to you, but to me, it's the only chance to make something right." We didn't speak for the rest of the night. The silence between us was heavier than the walls closing in. The next morning, Lydia stopped by. She found me sitting on the porch, arms crossed, still fuming from the argument. She looked me over with that sharp gaze of hers and didn't bother with pleasantries. "You think this place is beneath you, don't you?" I stiffened. "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to. It's written all over your face." She leaned on her walking stick, her voice firm. "You think comfort and luxury mean happiness, but life isn't measured in silk sheets or city lights. It's measured in what you build with your own two hands." Her words stung, partly because they were true. I wasn't used to being called out so directly, especially by someone I barely knew. But Lydia's tone wasn't cruel, it was steady, like she had lived enough years to know what mattered and what didn't. Later that night, I watched Thomas as he sat at the kitchen table, staring at something in his hands. When I entered, he quickly tucked it away into a drawer. "What was that?" I asked. "Nothing," he said too quickly. It wasn't nothing. His shoulders were tense, his eyes shadowed with thoughts he wasn't sharing. He kissed my forehead and told me to sleep, but I couldn't shake the feeling. For the first time, I wondered if the house wasn't the only thing he was trying to rebuild. Something had broken long before I arrived in his life, something he hadn't told me about. And though he thought he was protecting me, I felt the weight of it pressing between us. That night, lying awake in the dark, I realized our marriage wasn't the fairy tale I had imagined. It was something else entirely, a story with secrets buried deep, waiting to be uncovered. For days after our argument, I felt the silence between us stretch like a rope pulled too tight. Thomas worked from dawn until dusk, throwing himself into repairing the house as if every nail he hammered could silence the tension that lingered between us. I watched him from the porch one evening, sweat streaking down his back, determination hardening every line of his body. Something in him was heavier than the broken house, something I didn't understand. That night, as we sat at the kitchen table with a single lamp casting a weak circle of light, I finally asked, "Thomas, what happened to your family? Why is this house all that's left?" He didn't answer right away. He rubbed his hands together slowly, like a man trying to gather the strength to speak. When he finally looked up, his eyes carried a weariness I had never seen before. "It started with my father," he said quietly. "Judge Franklin Whitmore. He was offered money, a bribe, to approve a development project out here. They wanted to tear down protected land, build resorts, shopping centers, destroy the history this place holds. He refused, said the law wasn't for sale." Thomas's voice grew tighter. They didn't forgive him for that. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. "What do you mean?" At first, it was small things, anonymous threats, vandalism, but then it escalated. My sister Emily, she was only 20, was in a car accident. Someone ran her off the road late at night. She survived, but she's been in a wheelchair ever since. His voice cracked, and for a moment he couldn't go on. I covered his hand with mine, my chest aching. "Oh, Thomas!" "And then there was my mother," he continued. "Eleanor. She ran a medical research lab. She was brilliant, dedicated her life to her work. One night there was a fire. It gutted the entire facility. Millions in equipment and years of research gone. The official report said faulty wiring, but we knew better." His jaw clenched, the muscles in his face tightening like he was holding back rage. The stress of it all, losing the lab, Emily's accident, the threats against my father, it broke her. She got sick. Cancer. She didn't fight it long. She said she didn't have the strength anymore. A year later, she was gone. I sat frozen, the weight of his words pressing down on me. The peeling walls around us seemed to close in, carrying echoes of every tragedy he described. "And my father?" I whispered. "He lost everything. His position, his reputation. They painted him as a stubborn old man who couldn't adapt. After my mother died, he just gave up. This house is all that's left, Caroline. Everything else was burned, taken, or destroyed." Silence settled over us, broken only by the hum of cicadas outside. I had thought this place was just an inconvenience, a step down from the life I imagined. But sitting there, hearing the truth, I realized it was much more. It was the last fragile remnant of a family systematically torn apart. My hands trembled as I held my cup of tea. "Thomas, do you think all of it was an accident?" He met my eyes, and the darkness in them chilled me. "No, none of it was an accident." That was the moment I understood. We weren't just living in a broken house in the countryside. We were living in the ruins of a war someone had waged against his family. And that war wasn't over yet. At first, I resisted every small task Lydia suggested. Pulling weeds in the garden felt beneath me. Scrubbing floors seemed endless, and carrying buckets of water left my arms aching. But Lydia didn't accept excuses. She would stand over me, her cane tapping against the porch, her sharp eyes watching every move. "Grip the hoe like this," she instructed one morning, guiding my hands with surprising strength. "You're not fighting the earth. You're working with it." Sweat dripped down my temples as I bent over the stubborn soil. My nails broke, dirt caked under my fingers, and every muscle in my back screamed. Yet, when the row of earth finally loosened beneath my hands, I felt a strange flicker of pride. The seeds I planted weren't much, just a handful of beans and tomatoes, but they were mine. Days blurred into a rhythm I had never known. Wake with the sunrise, work in the garden, sweep dust from corners long forgotten, wash clothes on the line and watch them flap like flags in the humid wind. The house, still broken in many ways, began to breathe again. And so did I, Thomas noticed too. One afternoon, he found me on my knees, scrubbing the kitchen tiles. "Caroline," he said softly, almost in disbelief, "you didn't have to." I cut him off with a tired smile. "I know, but I wanted to." His eyes softened, and for the first time in weeks, I felt we were on the same side. Lydia's influence stretched beyond chores. She invited me to her kitchen one evening, showing me how to make cornbread the way her mother had taught her. The air smelled of butter and fresh herbs, and for once, I wasn't thinking about what I had lost. I was simply present, kneading dough with flour dusting my hands. Later, Thomas suggested we try fishing at the creek that wound behind the property. I almost laughed, but he handed me a simple rod and baited the hook for me. The air was thick with humidity, dragonflies skimming the water. When I felt the sudden tug on the line, my heart jumped. I pulled too quickly, losing the catch, but Thomas only laughed. His laughter was deep and warm, and it echoed across the water in a way that made me laugh too. That night, we ate what he caught, sitting under the oak tree in the yard with the swing creaking gently above us. Fireflies blinked in the dusk, tiny sparks in the thick summer air. I rested my head on his shoulder, surprised by how natural it felt. "I thought you hated it here," he teased. "I did," I admitted. "Maybe I still do. But it's different now." He wrapped his arm around me, pulling me closer. "We'll make it ours, Caroline. Piece by piece." The words settled into me like roots sinking deep into the soil I had cursed only days earlier. For the first time, I wondered if this place could become more than a prison. Maybe it could become a home. The house wasn't whole yet, and neither were we. But as I watched the glow of fireflies light up the night, I realized we were no longer standing in ruins. We were building something new. The attic had always unsettled me. The narrow stairs creaked under my weight, and the air grew thick with dust the higher I climbed. For weeks I avoided it, convincing myself we didn't need anything stored up there. But one rainy afternoon, when the garden was too wet to tend and the walls felt like they were closing in, I finally braved the climb. The attic was a graveyard of the Whitmore family's past. Boxes sagged under the weight of years. Old trunks bore initials worn nearly invisible, and cobwebs stretched like lace across forgotten furniture. I opened a trunk and found a stack of photographs. Thomas as a boy, his mother Eleanor smiling with pride beside him, his sister Emily with sunlight caught in her hair. There were newspaper clippings too, carefully folded, headlines about Judge Franklin Whitmore presiding over high-profile cases, about the medical research lab Eleanor directed. But as I turned deeper into the box, the clippings changed. Suspicious fire at research lab. Judge Whitmore under scrutiny. Local family faces tragedy. Each headline cut like a knife. It was one thing to hear Thomas tell me about his family's suffering. It was another to see it laid out in black ink, the whole town watching their downfall like a spectacle. When Thomas found me sitting cross-legged in the dust, my hands trembling over the papers, his face darkened. He knelt beside me. "You weren't supposed to carry that weight, Caroline." I touched his arm. "But it's my weight too now." That night, we sat in the kitchen long after the rain had stopped, the evidence spread across the table between us. We spoke in low voices, each headline adding fuel to the suspicion already gnawing at us. None of it was coincidence. A few nights later, fate handed us more than suspicion. It handed us proof. Thomas and I had gone for a walk after dinner, the heavy air buzzing with cicadas. As we passed near the old bathhouse by the edge of the property line, we heard voices. Men's voices, rough and careless, carried by the summer air. We froze in the shadows, every instinct in me screaming to run, but Thomas's hand tightened around mine. "Wait," he whispered. Through the open window, we caught fragments of their conversation. Samuel Thornton's voice was unmistakable, low, smug, the kind of tone that dripped with arrogance. Told him no one would trace the fire. By the time they figured anything out, the insurance money was long gone. Laughter erupted, sharp and cruel. Another man chimed in, his words slurred with drink. "And that girl, the one in the accident. Shame it didn't finish her off. But it sent a clear message, didn't it?" My stomach dropped. I felt Thomas stiffen beside me, his breath sharp as a blade. They went on, boasting, their voices thick with pride as they described what they'd done. My hands shook, but I slipped my phone from my pocket, pressing record. The red light blinked like a heartbeat as every damning word was captured. We didn't move until their voices faded, the slam of a door marking their departure. Only then did Thomas pull me into the night, his face pale with fury. Back in the safety of our kitchen, we listened to the recording, each word confirming what we already feared. Samuel Thornton and his men hadn't just destroyed Thomas's family by chance. They had orchestrated it. I looked at Thomas, the glow of the phone screen lighting his eyes. "We have proof now." He nodded slowly, his jaw set. "It's not enough to bring them down, but it's a start." For the first time, I felt the tide turning. The past wasn't just haunting us anymore, we were fighting back. The recording sat like a live wire between us. Every time I replayed it, the words made my skin crawl. Samuel Thornton laughing about the fire, boasting about Emily's accident, treating the destruction of an entire family as a casual game. We had proof now, but it was fragile. A single file on my phone, easy for any slick lawyer to dismiss as doctored or staged. Thomas paced the kitchen, his hands restless, eyes storm-dark. It's not enough to convict him outright. He'll say it was a joke or claim the voices aren't his. "But it's something," I argued, clutching the phone as if it might dissolve in my hands. "We can't just do nothing." He stopped, looking at me like he was weighing the cost of involving me in this fight. Finally, he exhaled. "We'll go to the police and the IRS." "The IRS?" I asked, startled. Thomas nodded grimly. "Thornton's been laundering money for years. His arrogance leaves a trail. I know people, contacts from before everything fell apart. One of them works in tax enforcement. If Thornton is cooking his books, they'll find it. And once the feds are involved, even his friends in local law won't be able to shield him." His certainty steadied me, though fear still gnawed at my stomach. But what if he finds out we're the ones who exposed him? "He's dangerous, Thomas. He came to me then, kneeling so we were eye to eye. His hand closed over mine, grounding me. "Caroline, I won't let him touch you. Not after what he's already done to this family. This is our chance to end it." I searched his face, and in his expression I saw not just determination, but something deeper. Relief, maybe, at finally being able to strike back. I realized then how heavy this burden had been for him, how long he had carried it alone. The next morning, he packed a small bag. I watched him slip the phone into a case, then burn a copy of the recording onto a disc. He tucked it into the lining of his jacket, as if it were more valuable than gold. "I'll take it straight to the police in Baton Rouge," he said. "Then I'll meet with my contact at the IRS office downtown. By tomorrow night, Thornton won't know what hit him." I tried to smile, but my throat felt tight. "What if they don't believe you?" "They will," he said firmly, "because we'll keep pushing until they do." I followed him to the porch, the humid air heavy with the scent of wet earth. Lydia stood at the edge of the yard, watching us with her piercing gaze. She gave me the faintest nod, as if to say, "Stand your ground." When Thomas kissed me goodbye, his lips lingered, filled with unspoken promises. I held on to him, not wanting to let go, afraid of the shadows waiting beyond our broken fence. As the truck rumbled down the gravel road, I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling the echo of his heartbeat. I was terrified of losing him, of what Thornton might do if he discovered our plan. But beneath the fear, another feeling stirred. Resolve. If Thomas was willing to risk everything to fight back, then so was I. Whatever storm was coming, we would face it together. The waiting was the hardest part. Every hour Thomas was gone stretched like a lifetime, the silence of the countryside gnawing at me. I tried to keep busy, sweeping, tending the small rows of vegetables in the garden, but my mind kept drifting back to that recording and the danger of what we were doing. By evening, the phone rang. My heart lurched when I heard Thomas's voice. "It's done," he said, his tone steady but charged with something electric. "The police have the recording. And the IRS, Caroline, they already had Thornton flagged. Our evidence gave them the push they needed." 2 days later, the news broke. I'll never forget the moment. Lydia burst into the yard, newspaper clutched in her hand, her face alight with grim satisfaction. "Turn on the TV," she ordered. On the screen, a reporter stood in front of Thornton's gleaming office building in Baton Rouge. Behind her, flashing lights painted the glass walls red and blue. Officers moved in and out of the building, carrying boxes, their faces set in grim determination. The banner across the bottom of the screen read, "Businessman Samuel Thornton under federal investigation." I leaned forward, my pulse pounding. The reporter's words spilled out. "Authorities executed a surprise search warrant this morning at Thornton Enterprises, seizing documents and electronic records. Federal agents confirm the investigation involves large-scale tax evasion, suspected money laundering, and potential connections to past criminal activities." The camera cut to Samuel himself, escorted down the marble steps by 2 officers. He wasn't in handcuffs yet, but the sight of him without his tailored control shook me. His usually polished smile was gone, his face slick with sweat. He snapped at the reporters crowding him, shoving a microphone aside, his voice cracking as he barked, "This is a mistake. My lawyers will have this thrown out in a day." But even through the screen, I could see it, the panic underneath his bluster. For the first time, Samuel Thornton wasn't the untouchable king of the room. He was cornered. Thomas came home that night, exhaustion written across his face, but his eyes gleamed with something I hadn't seen in months, vindication. "They found everything, Caroline. Shell companies, hidden accounts, falsified invoices. Thornton thought he was clever, but he left a paper trail a mile long." I clutched his arm, almost dizzy with relief. "So it's real? They can't just make this go away." He shook his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Not this time. The IRS doesn't play games. And once they tie this to the fire, to Emily's accident, he's finished." Later that night, I sat on the porch swing, the cicadas loud in the dark. The house still sagged in places, the shutters still clattered in the wind, but for the first time I felt a shift. The air tasted different, lighter. I remembered Samuel's face on that screen, the mask of arrogance slipping as the cameras caught every crack. For so long, he had been a shadow looming over Thomas's family, destroying lives with impunity. Now he was the one exposed, his empire crumbling in front of everyone. When Thomas joined me on the swing, sliding his arm around my shoulders, we didn't need words. We both knew this was only the beginning. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And as the night closed around us, I allowed myself, for the first time, to believe in justice. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Once the IRS sank their teeth into Thornton's empire, everything began to unravel. Subpoenas were issued, financial records combed over line by line, and suddenly the whispers about his shady dealings turned into hard evidence, stacked high on prosecutors' desks. I followed the news with my heart in my throat. The reports were relentless. Shell companies funneling millions, offshore accounts hidden behind fake names, falsified tax filings spanning over a decade. Thornton had built his fortune not on business brilliance, but on deceit. But the investigation didn't stop at money. Detectives reopened old cases. Emily's accident, the fire at Eleanor's lab. Witnesses who had been too afraid to speak years ago now came forward, emboldened by the sight of federal agents combing through Thornton's offices. Each new testimony added weight to what Thomas had been saying all along. None of it was coincidence. The day of Thornton's arrest, the town buzzed like a hornet's nest. I watched the footage on television, my breath caught in my chest. He was led out of his mansion in handcuffs, his once pristine suit wrinkled, his tie askew. His face was flushed, twisted with rage, as he shouted at the cameras, "This is a setup. You'll all regret this." But no one was listening anymore. The image of Samuel Thornton as an untouchable man of power was gone. Thomas came home late that night, his shoulders sagging, but his eyes brighter than I had ever seen them. He dropped a stack of papers on the kitchen table. Court filings, indictments, official seals stamped in bold. "They've charged him, Caroline. Tax evasion, money laundering, arson, reckless endangerment. And more is coming. He won't see freedom for decades, if ever." For a moment, I just stared at the papers. It felt surreal. After months of living under the shadow of his crimes, Samuel Thornton was finally the one trapped. Tears stung my eyes as I reached for Thomas's hand. "Your family, they'll finally have justice." He nodded, his jaw tight. "It won't undo what he did to Emily, or bring my mother back. But the truth is out. They can't smear my father's name anymore. People will know he wasn't some stubborn old fool. He was a man who stood against corruption." The next morning, Lydia stopped by with fresh bread. She didn't say much, just placed the loaf on the counter and gave us both a look of quiet pride. It struck me then how much this fight had never just been about Thomas's family. It was about everyone who had lived under Thornton's shadow, too afraid to speak. For the first time, the air around our home felt different. Lighter. The peeling walls still needed paint, the porch still sagged, but the burden pressing on us had lifted. That evening, Thomas and I sat on the swing beneath the oak tree, watching fireflies rise into the twilight. The world hadn't magically healed, but a part of it had been set right. Justice had been served. And for the first time in a long time, I felt hope, not just for us, but for the future we were still learning to build together. Months passed, and the house slowly transformed under our hands. The porch no longer sagged, new boards shone with fresh paint. The shutters stood straight, no longer clattering in the wind, but framing the windows like proud shoulders. Even the garden, once a patch of stubborn soil, now bloomed with rows of tomatoes and beans, their green reaching toward the sun. I looked around one evening as I hung laundry on the line, the fabric glowing in the fading light, and realized the house didn't feel haunted anymore. It felt lived in. It felt ours. Life settled into a rhythm I had never expected to embrace. Mornings began with the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Thomas already outside checking the garden or sanding a piece of wood for some new repair. Afternoons were filled with work, real, honest work that left me tired in a way that was strangely satisfying. And evenings belonged to us, sitting under the oak tree while the cicadas sang, fireflies blinking around us like tiny lanterns. I often thought back to the woman I was when I first stepped onto this porch, the city bride who had wanted chandeliers and honeymoons, who had sneered at the dirt under her nails. That woman felt like a stranger to me now. Somewhere between Lydia's sharp lessons, the quiet resilience of Thomas, and the battles we had fought together, I had shed that skin. One night, as we shared cornbread Lydia had baked, Thomas caught me watching him across the table. His smile was softer now, less burdened, though the scars of the past would never fully fade. "What are you thinking?" he asked. I shook my head, unable to keep the tears from pricking my eyes. That maybe this is enough. More than enough. He reached across the table, his hand covering mine. "Caroline, I never wanted to take away your dreams. I just wanted to give us a life where we weren't always looking over our shoulders." I squeezed his hand back. "I know. And I finally see it. Luxury fades, but what we've built here, it lasts. Outside, the night air wrapped around us, warm and thick. The house behind us wasn't perfect. Some walls still bore cracks, and the roof still groaned under heavy rain. But to me, it was beautiful because every corner carried our fingerprints. Every repaired beam carried a piece of our story. Justice had come, though it hadn't erased the pain. Emily still lived with her injury. Eleanor would never return, and Franklin's dignity had been tested in ways no man deserved. But the truth had been restored, and Thornton was gone from our lives, locked away to face the weight of his crimes. I no longer longed for the ballroom weddings or the tropical beaches. Happiness had revealed itself in humbler shapes. A repaired porch swing, Thomas's laughter echoing across the yard, Lydia's steady presence, and the quiet knowledge that we had survived. The future stretched ahead, uncertain but bright. And as I leaned against Thomas beneath the oak tree, the fireflies blinking like scattered stars, I understood something I had never believed before. Real happiness wasn't found in grandeur. It was found in justice, in love, and in the fragile peace we had finally carved out for ourselves. The air in Boston that October felt like something out of a dream. Crisp but gentle, golden leaves swirling in the wind as if the city itself had decided to celebrate with us. That was the day I became Mrs. Emily Parker Whitmore. I can still see the lights of the grand ballroom, the gleam of crystal glasses, and the way Daniel's hand felt wrapped firmly around mine when we said our vows. Everything about that wedding shimmered. My parents had insisted on doing it properly, and Daniel's family was just as proud. But to me, the magic wasn't in the chandeliers or the champagne. It was in the way Daniel looked at me when I walked down the aisle, like I was the only person in the world. We had been together for 3 years before that day. 3 years of stolen weekends, late-night walks along the Charles River, and long conversations about the future we wanted. When he proposed, I didn't hesitate. I knew he was the one. Daniel was already making a name for himself as a promising young attorney, while I had just finished my degree in communications and started my first real job. We were young, ambitious, and in love, ready to build a life together. The wedding felt like the culmination of every dream I'd carried since I was a little girl, and the honeymoon that followed only deepened that feeling. Daniel made even the simplest moments special. Whether it was trying new foods at tiny restaurants, holding my hand on crowded streets, or whispering how lucky he felt, I believed him. I believed in us. The first years of our marriage were as close to perfect as anyone could imagine. Our apartment in Boston wasn't big, but it was ours. We filled it with books, framed photographs, and the scent of candles I insisted on buying every season. Daniel worked long hours at his law firm, often buried in case files, but he always came home with a smile. He'd drop his briefcase by the door, kiss me on the forehead, and ask about my day as if nothing mattered more. On weekends, we carved out time just for us. Sometimes it was as simple as walking through Boston Common. Sometimes it was trips we saved up for. Cape Cod in the summer, Maine in the fall. Every vacation became a small ritual of love. Daniel taking care of everything, me marveling at how he managed to balance work, responsibility, and still make me feel cherished. Friends often joked that we acted like newlyweds even years after the wedding. I didn't care how it looked. It was true. I would catch him watching me across the room and blush like a schoolgirl. He had this calm strength about him, a patience I'd never seen in anyone else. Even when things went wrong, missed trains, sudden downpours on trips, little accidents, Daniel never lost his temper. Instead, he'd laugh, find a solution, and somehow make me laugh too. I told myself more than once that if men with angelic tempers truly existed, then I had married one. He wasn't just my husband. He was my partner, my safe place, my miracle. Looking back, it's almost painful how flawless those years felt. I had no reason to doubt him, no reason to fear the future. At that time, if someone had asked me to describe my life in one word, I would have chosen blessed. Because that's how it felt, like I had been given a gift so rare, so fragile, that nothing could ever take it away. Or so I thought. Not long after our third anniversary, Daniel came home with a look in his eyes that I had only seen a handful of times before. It was the look he got when he was standing on the edge of something big. He hung his coat, loosened his tie, and sat across from me at the kitchen table. "Emily," he said, "I've just taken on a case unlike anything I've ever handled. This one could define my career." He wasn't exaggerating. His client was a powerful businessman in Boston, the kind of man who appeared in financial magazines and had his name on museum wings. The case? A divorce. Not just any divorce, but one involving assets that stretched into the hundreds of millions: mansions, art collections, antique jewelry, entire portfolios of investments. The wife was demanding half, though she had never worked a single day or contributed to his businesses. I listened as Daniel described the mountain of documents, the endless meetings, and the sheer weight of what was at stake. Part of me was proud. This was proof of how far he had come. At such a young age, to be trusted with something of this scale spoke volumes about his talent and reputation. But another part of me was uneasy. The way he described the wife, relentless, demanding, manipulative, made me worry about what he was stepping into. "Are you sure this is worth it?" I asked him one night as he reviewed paperwork, well past midnight. "It sounds exhausting, Daniel, and dangerous in its own way." He smiled at me, that calm, reassuring smile I had fallen in love with. "Emily, this is what I was trained for. I know how to handle people like her. And besides, it's not just about money, it's about justice. He built everything with his own hands. She's trying to take what she never earned." I wanted to believe him, and for the most part I did. Still, as I watched him bury himself in briefs and depositions, a knot formed in my chest. When he finally sat down with the wife, the stories he told me afterward made my skin crawl. She carried herself like royalty, despite coming from nothing, and demanded a lifestyle that would cripple her husband financially. Daniel, with his composure and sharp mind, cut through her arguments one by one. He reminded her that most of the assets had been acquired before their marriage. He pressed on the fact that she had lived a life of luxury funded entirely by someone else's effort. In the end, she folded. She accepted a large apartment and a generous monthly allowance, but nothing close to the half she had been fighting for. Daniel came home that evening with a spark of triumph in his eyes, though he never gloated. "It's settled," he told me, slipping off his watch and setting it on the counter. "The papers will be signed tomorrow." He's satisfied, and frankly, so am I. True to his word, his client was more than satisfied. The man embraced Daniel in gratitude and immediately arranged for a hefty transfer to his account as payment for services. It wasn't just money, it was validation, recognition that Daniel Whitmore was a force to be reckoned with in the world of law. When Daniel called me after leaving his client's office, I could hear the relief in his voice. "Emily, I'll wrap everything up tomorrow morning, and then I'm coming straight home. No more late nights, no more endless calls. Just us." I remember smiling as I set the table that night, believing him, believing that once this storm passed, we'd return to the life we loved so much. That Friday evening, I wanted everything to be perfect. Daniel had promised the case was finally over, that he would be done with the endless negotiations and paperwork. I stopped by the market on my way home and bought his favorite wine, along with ingredients for a simple but elegant dinner. I wanted us to have a night to ourselves, away from clients, courts, and the constant stress. When my phone rang, I was setting candles on the table. Daniel's voice came through the line, warm and a little tired. "I'm in the garage now, Emily. Give me 15 minutes, and I'll be home." I laughed softly, telling him not to rush. "Drive safe. Dinner's almost ready." The call ended, and I felt a flutter of excitement. I lit the candles, dimmed the lights, and turned on the playlist we always used during dinners together. The apartment filled with the comforting aroma of roasted chicken and herbs. I imagined the look on his face when he walked in, saw the candles, and realized I had been waiting just for him. But 15 minutes passed, then 20, then 40. I called his phone, thinking maybe he'd been delayed by traffic. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. I frowned, checking the clock again. Something didn't feel right. Daniel always kept his word. Even if he was running late, he would have called. By the time an hour had gone by, my hands were trembling. I called the parking garage where he usually left his car. The attendant confirmed what I already feared. Mr. Whitmore picked up his car about an hour ago. He should have left already. That was when the panic hit me full force. I threw on a coat and hurried downstairs, scanning the street as if he might suddenly appear around the corner. I walked block after block, checking familiar spots, calling his name under my breath. Nothing. The city felt too big, too dark, and suddenly hostile. I called my parents. My voice cracked as I tried to explain, but there wasn't much to say. Daniel had left the garage. He had never made it home. Next, I called the police. They took my statement, asked for details about his last known whereabouts, what he had been wearing, what car he drove. The words felt surreal leaving my mouth, as if I were describing a stranger and not the man I had kissed goodbye that very morning. Hours slipped by in a blur of phone calls and tears. My parents rushed over, sitting with me in the candlelit apartment that now felt unbearably empty. The chicken had gone cold, the wine sat unopened. Every creak in the hallway, every car horn outside made me jolt, hoping it was him. But midnight came, then 2 a.m., then dawn, and still there was no sign of Daniel. That night was the beginning of a nightmare I could never have imagined. My husband had vanished, as if the earth itself had swallowed him whole. One moment he was calling me from the garage, promising he was on his way home. The next he was gone without a trace. The days that followed Daniel's disappearance blurred into each other like a fog I couldn't escape. The police opened an investigation, but their words were cautious from the beginning. Adults have the right to disappear. One detective reminded me, gently, though his tone made it clear he didn't believe that was the case here. They checked traffic cameras, questioned the garage attendants again, even canvassed nearby streets. But nothing. No witnesses, no accidents reported, no trace of his car. It was as if Daniel had simply vanished into thin air. I couldn't accept that. I called his phone every hour, left voicemail after voicemail. I checked local hospitals, imagining he might have been in an accident and was waiting for me to find him. Every time the phone rang, my heart leapt, only to crash back into emptiness when it was a friend, a neighbor, or another officer with no news. My parents and Daniel's parents stepped in quickly, trying to steady me. Together, we hired a private investigator, someone who promised he'd dig deeper than the police could. We printed posters with Daniel's photo, plastering them around Boston, on lampposts in grocery stores near subway stations. I posted his face online, begged for any information, even the smallest clue. Strangers reached out with sympathy, some with false leads, but none of it brought him back. Each morning, I woke up hoping it had been a nightmare, that I would roll over and see him lying next to me, breathing softly, the way he always did before work. But the bed was cold and reality was merciless. Weeks stretched into months, and with them came a slow unraveling of my mind. The constant questions: where was he? Was he hurt? Had someone taken him? Gnawed at me until I could no longer sleep, no longer eat. My body felt hollow, my hands shook without warning, and every corner of our apartment screamed his absence. Eventually, my parents made the decision for me. One evening, they guided me into the car and drove me to the hospital. I was admitted for treatment of severe depression and exhaustion. Lying in that sterile room, I felt like I had failed, not just as a wife, but as a human being. I couldn't find him, couldn't even hold myself together. Nights in the hospital were the darkest. But slowly, with therapy and medication, I began to surface from the depths of despair. When I was discharged, nothing in the world had changed. Daniel was still gone. But I realized I had two choices: drown in grief or find any way to keep moving. My doctor urged me to establish a routine, to find work that would occupy my hands and mind. So I did. I accepted part-time jobs, simple things at first, tasks that forced me out of bed in the morning. It wasn't about money. It was survival. The busier I was, the less room there was for the crushing silence of our empty apartment. I told myself it wasn't moving on. It was simply moving forward, one fragile step at a time. Work became my lifeline. After the hospital, I knew I couldn't let myself sink back into the void. My doctor had been right. I needed something to occupy my mind, something that demanded focus and routine. That was when I accepted a position helping an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, a former ballet dancer who had once graced stages in New York. She lived alone in a modest but charming apartment near the Charles River. Age had taken much of her mobility, so she needed someone to cook, clean, and run errands. At first, I felt clumsy, out of place, like I didn't belong in her world of old posters, trophies, and the faint scent of lavender that lingered in every room. But Mrs. Henderson welcomed me warmly, and little by little, I found comfort in the rhythm of caring for her. The work didn't erase the pain, but it dulled the sharp edges. I swept floors, prepared simple meals, and listened as she reminisced about performances from decades past. There was something soothing about her stories, how she had loved, lost, and kept going. She didn't know the details of my own tragedy, but sometimes when she caught the faraway look in my eyes, she'd gently pat my hand and say, "You'll find your way too, dear. Grief never leaves us, but it teaches us to move." Over time, word spread that I was reliable and hardworking. Other families in Boston began calling me for occasional help. Deep cleaning, house sitting, light organizing. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept me busy, and for that I was grateful. My days filled with tasks that left my body tired enough to sleep at night. Still, no matter how hard I tried, Daniel was always there in my mind. A song on the radio, a suit hanging in a client's closet, even the scent of his cologne on a stranger passing by. It all pulled me back to him. Some nights, I woke up convinced I had heard his key turning in the lock, only to be greeted by silence. Then came the day that changed everything. I had been hired to clean a grand estate in Back Bay, a sprawling townhouse owned by Victoria Reynolds, a woman whose name carried weight in Boston's business circles. The place was immaculate in a way that suggested money had smoothed over every corner. Marble floors, sweeping staircases, rooms lined with expensive art. I was dusting the shelves in the library when I heard it. A voice, deep and steady, drifting from the hallway. My heart clenched so hard I nearly dropped the vase in my hands. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But the cadence, the tone, it was Daniel's voice. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears, straining to catch every word. It was just casual conversation, muffled by the distance, but every syllable pierced me with recognition. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I shook my head, gripping the edge of the shelf to steady myself. No, it wasn't real. It couldn't be. I was imagining things, creating ghosts out of thin air because I missed him too much. That had to be it. And yet, my hands wouldn't stop trembling. I told myself it had been a trick of memory, a cruel echo conjured by loneliness. But the thought of that voice lingered, haunting me with every step. So when Victoria Reynolds called me again a few weeks later to return to the townhouse, I felt a knot of dread twist inside my stomach. Still, I went. Work was work, and I couldn't refuse. I was wiping down the marble counter in her kitchen when the sound of the front door opening startled me. Footsteps echoed through the hallway, confident, measured, achingly familiar. I turned, rag still in my hand, and froze. He walked in as though he belonged there, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in an expensive suit. For a split second, the world tilted. My heart leapt into my throat because I knew that face, even though it wasn't exactly the same. It was Daniel, but not the Daniel I had last kissed goodbye. His hair was shorter, neatly styled. A jagged scar traced along his left cheekbone. His eyes, once warm and steady, now seemed distant, guarded. And when those eyes landed on me, there was no flicker of recognition, no softening, no smile, only a faint narrowing of suspicion, as though I were nothing more than an intruder in his world. "Mr. Alexandrovich," Victoria's voice rang from the hallway, smooth and polished. "You're home early." I felt my knees weaken. Alexandrovich. That was the name she used. My mouth went dry as I whispered his name under my breath. "Daniel!" He glanced at me briefly, but there was no spark of memory. Nothing. He simply nodded toward Victoria, then walked past me without a word. It felt as though someone had carved open my chest. I stumbled through the rest of my tasks, my hands trembling so violently that I nearly dropped the dishes. When I finally left the house, the cold air outside hit me like a slap. I could barely breathe. That night, I sat with my parents at their dining table, recounting everything in broken fragments. "It was him," I insisted, gripping my mother's hand as though it could anchor me. The scar, the voice, the way he moved, it was Daniel. But he didn't know me. He looked right at me and my voice cracked. Nothing. My father frowned, exchanging a worried glance with my mother. "Emily, grief can play cruel tricks. Are you sure?" "I am sure," I said fiercely, tears burning down my cheeks. I know my own husband." They didn't argue, but I could see the doubt in their eyes. That was when I called the private investigator again. This time, I begged him to follow Victoria, to uncover who this so-called Dmitry Alexandrovich really was. Weeks later, he returned with the truth. The pieces fit together in a way that made me shiver. Daniel had been attacked the night he disappeared, beaten, and left unconscious near the entrance to Victoria's estate. She had found him, taken him in, and when he awoke, his memory was gone. With her influence and wealth, she arranged new documents under a new identity. And just like that, my husband became her husband. Hearing it out loud left me numb. Daniel hadn't chosen to leave me. He hadn't abandoned our life. He had been stolen, reshaped into someone else's story. And the worst part, he didn't even know it. The night I received the investigator's report, I barely slept. By morning, my decision was made. I walked into the police precinct with trembling hands, but a steady voice, carrying every piece of evidence I had. I showed them photographs, timelines, and investigators' written statement. "Dmitry Alexandrovich," I said firmly, "is my husband, Daniel Whitmore. He disappeared 2 years ago. He didn't run away, he was taken." The detective listened carefully, his expression unreadable. At first, I feared he might dismiss me, chalk it up to a grieving widow's delusion. But when he examined the scars, the matching dental records, the timeline that lined up too perfectly to be coincidence, his tone shifted. "We'll look into this," he said, "but you have to understand, it won't be simple." The next days were agonizing. The police questioned Victoria Reynolds. She arrived with her team of attorneys, polished and unshaken, as though she were walking into a business meeting rather than an interrogation. At first, she denied everything, but as the evidence piled up, she conceded just enough to protect herself. Yes, she had taken in a man who had been found near her home, injured and confused. Yes, she had provided medical care. Yes, she had given him a new life. But in her version, it wasn't abduction, it was charity. He had no memory of who he was, she told the officers. He was vulnerable. I cared for him when no one else did. He became my husband because he wanted stability, because I gave him a home. Her words made my stomach twist, but the detective wasn't swayed. Daniel, Dmitry, was ordered to undergo medical evaluation at Massachusetts General Hospital. They needed to know if his amnesia was real, if his identity matched the records I had provided. The day they transferred him, I stood in the hospital corridor, palms damp, heart racing like I was about to face a stranger and a ghost at once. When they wheeled him into the examination room, I caught my first clear look at him without the barrier of Victoria's presence. It was Daniel. My Daniel. The shape of his jaw, the curve of his shoulders, the small scar on his right wrist from when he'd cut himself opening it years ago. I stepped forward, whispering his name. Daniel, it's me. Emily. He looked at me with polite confusion, as though I were nothing more than another doctor or nurse hovering nearby. I'm sorry, he said quietly, his voice calm but empty. I don't know you. The words cut deeper than any knife. I tried again, showing him a photograph of our wedding, our life together. His eyes lingered on the image, but instead of recognition, there was only unease. Then he turned his head, searching the room until he found her. Victoria stood in the corner, arms crossed, eyes sharp. And when Daniel's gaze landed on her, it softened. That's my wife, he said simply. I felt the floor tilt beneath me. In that moment, I realized this battle was only beginning. The court ordered that Daniel stay with me and my parents while the doctors worked on his memory rehabilitation. It felt surreal preparing the guest room for him, knowing that just a few years ago we had shared a life, a bed, a future, and now he was a stranger under our roof. At first, he was polite but distant, speaking in short, careful sentences. He thanked my mother when she made him breakfast. He nodded when my father tried small talk about sports, but his eyes remained clouded, as if he were trying to map out a world that didn't fit. When I approached him with photo albums, his posture stiffened, but he didn't turn away. I laid the album on the table one evening, my hands trembling as I turned the pages. This was our wedding, I whispered, pointing to the photograph of us beneath a canopy of autumn leaves in Boston. His younger self beamed from the photo, eyes bright with joy. Daniel studied the picture carefully. His gaze lingered on the tuxedo, the smile, the way his arm wrapped around me. For a moment, something flickered, an almost imperceptible softness. But then it was gone. It feels familiar, he admitted, but I can't place it. I swallowed hard and tried again. I told him about our trips to Cape Cod, about how he once carried me across the beach because my shoes had broken. I described the night he had stayed up until dawn, helping me rehearse for a presentation, even though he had court the next morning. Little pieces of our life, hoping to light a spark. He listened quietly, sometimes tilting his head as if the stories brushed against the edge of his memory. But when I asked if he remembered, he only shook his head, his voice heavy with frustration. I want to, Emily, but it's like trying to grab smoke. Meanwhile, Victoria refused to let go. She showed up at the hospital during his checkups, hovering in the waiting area with flowers and expensive gifts. Once, she even appeared outside my parents' house, demanding to see him. I closed the door in her face, but not before hearing the desperation in her voice. He's mine now, she hissed. You're clinging to the past. Her words burned. But I reminded myself this wasn't about winning or losing. This was about Daniel's truth, his life, our marriage that had been stolen from us. Still, I couldn't ignore the way his eyes wavered whenever her name was mentioned. At night, I sometimes found him standing by the window, staring into the dark, shoulders tense. It's like I'm split in two, he confessed once, his voice low. Part of me feels safe here, with you, but another part feels like I owe her everything. She saved me. I wanted to scream that she had only taken advantage of his broken state, but I held my tongue. His pain was real, his confusion undeniable. All I could do was stay close, reminding him of the life we had built, hoping that somewhere inside, my Daniel was still there, waiting to come back to me. It was the doctor who suggested we try something different. Sometimes memory isn't restored by pictures or stories, he explained. Sometimes it takes a place, a sensation, to trigger what the brain has locked away. His words stayed with me until one evening, when I found myself driving Daniel back toward the garage where he had last called me, the place where his life with me had ended. As we pulled in, I felt my chest tighten. The structure hadn't changed. Same rows of concrete pillars, same fluorescent lights humming overhead. To me, It was a graveyard of hope. To Daniel, it was still just a parking garage. He stepped out of the car slowly, scanning the rows as though trying to make sense of why we were there. Emily, I don't. His voice trailed off. His hand went to his temple. Just walk with me, I whispered. We moved down the ramp together, our footsteps echoing. I led him toward the spot where his car had been parked that night. As soon as we stopped, his body stiffened. He gripped the railing beside him, breath quickening. And then it happened. He staggered, clutching his head, and let out a choked sound. His knees buckled, and I caught his arm to steady him. His eyes were wide, pupils blown, and tears spilled before he could stop them. I remember, he gasped. Images poured back into him, jagged and violent. He told me in broken phrases, men stepping out of the shadows, fists slamming into his ribs, the sharp metallic taste of blood in his mouth. Hands dragging him across cold pavement, then darkness. When he woke, Victoria was there, telling him his name was Dimitri, telling him his past was gone. His voice broke as he pressed his forehead against my shoulder. Emily, I didn't leave you. I never left you. I wrapped my arms around him, tears streaming down my own face. I know, I whispered fiercely. I knew something was wrong. I never stopped believing. We stood there in the hollow quiet of the garage, clinging to each other as though we could make up for every lost year. For the first time since his disappearance, I felt Daniel's embrace, not as a stranger's, but as my husband's. When we returned home, the police were waiting to hear everything. Daniel gave his statement, describing the ambush in as much detail as his memory allowed. The detectives' faces hardened. This was no random attack. They reopened the case immediately, launching a full investigation into who had orchestrated it. For the first time in years, there was movement, momentum, a path toward justice. As for me, I felt something I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. Hope, not the fragile, desperate hope that had haunted me since his disappearance, but something stronger. Daniel remembered. He was mine again, and together we would find the truth. The investigation moved quickly once Daniel's memories returned. His testimony, combined with the private investigator's earlier findings, gave the detectives a clear direction. Within weeks, the truth came into focus. The attack had not been random, nor was it some desperate act by strangers. It had been orchestrated by none other than the man Daniel had defended in the divorce case, the wealthy businessman who had so desperately wanted to protect his fortune. It was almost unthinkable. Daniel had won that case, saved the man millions, and yet, behind the scenes, enemies were made. The wife's family, furious over the settlement, had connections, money, and more than enough bitterness to act on their anger. They had paid for Daniel to be silenced. Permanently, hearing the details made my blood run cold. I could picture it so clearly now. Daniel stepping into the garage, unaware of the shadows lurking, unaware that his life was about to be ripped away. The men who carried out the attack were eventually tracked down, arrested, and charged. And with them, the names of those who had ordered it came to light. Justice, long overdue, was finally in motion. The day the indictments were announced, Daniel and I stood together outside the courthouse. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashed, but I barely noticed. All I cared about was the way his hand tightened around mine, grounding me in the reality that we had survived. He had survived. From there, the process of restoring his identity began. It was strange, seeing official documents with another man's name erased and replaced with his true one, Daniel Whitmore. He was no longer Dmitry Alexandrovich. He was my husband again, legally and irrevocably. The moment the paperwork was finalized, I felt as though a chain had been broken. Victoria Reynolds fought the decision at first, clinging to the life she had built with him. She appeared in hearings, argued that she had saved him, loved him, and deserved to keep him. But in the end, even she couldn't deny the truth. He wasn't hers. He never had been. When the final ruling came down, I saw her face in the courtroom. Beautiful, composed, but utterly devastated. She looked at Daniel one last time, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears, and then she turned away. It would be easy to hate her, to reduce her to nothing more than a villain. But part of me understood her grief. She hadn't attacked Daniel. She had found a broken man and built a life around him, however misguided. Losing him must have felt like losing the ground beneath her feet. For us, though, it was the beginning of something new. Daniel moved back into our apartment, though it took time for both of us to adjust. The memories were there now, but fragile, like glass that had been shattered and pieced back together. Some days he woke with fragments missing, and I would remind him patiently. Other days he remembered things I had long forgotten, small details, private jokes, and we would laugh until tears filled our eyes. We learned to live slowly, deliberately, savoring what we had nearly lost. Dinners at home felt sacred. Walks through the city became a quiet celebration. Even the ordinary moments, folding laundry together, sharing coffee in the morning, carried weight and meaning. We no longer assumed time was promised. We cherished it as the gift it truly was. Looking back now, I realize our story was never about perfection. It was about resilience, about choosing each other, even when the world tried to tear us apart. Love doesn't erase suffering. It doesn't shield us from betrayal or loss, but it endures, it heals, and sometimes it brings us back from the very edge of forgetting. I once thought I had lost Daniel forever. Now, every time he takes my hand, every time he says my name with recognition in his eyes, I know the truth. Real love can survive even the cruelest storms. It can overcome loss, deception, and even the shadows of memory itself.